The westbound train hissed like a wounded animal as it groaned to a stop at the Mercy Hill depot, and Martha Larkspur stepped down with everything she owned in a single carpet bag, and not a soul waiting to claim her. It wasn't the loneliness that hit first, nor the dry sting of prairie wind slicing between the spaces of her coat. It was the silence. No voice calling her name. No familiar face lifting above the dust of the platform. Just the rusted metal sign creaking on its hook. Mercy Hill, Esta 1862. The sun hung just above the grain elevator and church steeple, casting long shadows across the half-rotted boards of the town's single strip. She gripped the worn leather handle of her bag tighter. Her knuckles had long ago become stiff from years behind a needle, and the weight of the journey, 5 days from St. Louis, 11 from Liverpool, had set itself into her spine like thread through canvas. Her dress was pressed, navy wool, modest. Her hat was pinned proper. But nothing in her bearing could soften the stares of the townsfolk who had paused their sweeping and hammering to glance her way, then turn back with no nod, no smile, no welcome. Inside her coat pocket, folded down to nearly nothing, was the letter. She had read it more times than she cared to count. Each phrase etched into her mind as clearly as the ink faded on its edge. A decent woman of strength and modest character will find a good place by my side, it had said. We work the land, no time for frivolity, but I offer shelter, name, and honest work. It was signed S. Mercer, neat, stern handwriting, plain and without flourish, and now, no man in sight. The last passenger to disembark was a young family, mother, father, 2 squalling little ones, and a babe in arms. They passed her without a glance, pulling their cart toward the general store. The station master, a round man with a silver beard and thick spectacles, stepped down from the platform and touched his cap. "Ma'am," he said kindly, with a voice worn soft from years of weather. "You waiting for someone?" She swallowed once. "I believe so." He raised a brow and glanced toward the street. "You'd be Miss Larkspur, then?" "I am." "Well, now." He looked past her. As if someone might still be running late. No one was. Only dust and the sound of a hammer in the distance. "Mr. Mercer was here about an hour ago. Took one look at the schedule and, well, said he had business to tend to. Might have misread the arrival time. Though, he seemed bothered." "Bothered?" The man hesitated, then offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said, "If she ain't tall and strong-looking, don't call for me," and left. For a moment, Martha said nothing. The words landed like iron in her chest. She let out a breath that trembled more than she liked. "I see," she said. The station master shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "There's a bench inside, and coffee. Cold, but not bad. You're welcome to rest there till next train east comes." "When is that?" 3 days' time." She nodded slowly. "Thank you." He tipped his cap again and shuffled off, leaving her alone on the platform. Her carpet-bag thudded as she set it down beside her. She sat, smoothing her skirt across her knees, lifting her chin as the wind caught the hem of her coat. She would not weep. Not here. Not after all this distance. Across the street, near the corral, a tall man leaned against the fence. His arms were crossed, hat low over his brow. He had the sort of stillness that didn't ask for notice, but earned it. He didn't approach, didn't wave, just watched, like the land itself might watch a wounded creature to see if it would rise. She noticed him noticing her. And that was enough. Night fell heavy, and early. The depot's lamps flickered orange against the wooden walls, casting long shadows across the floor. Martha curled herself onto the bench inside, using her carpet bag as a makeshift pillow. The coffee had been bitter, but hot. She sipped it slowly, then folded her hands in her lap. Outside, The prairie was silent, save for the cry of a nighthawk and the shuffle of hooves at the livery. The town had gone quiet, but her mind remained loud. She remembered the seamstress shop she had kept in Liverpool, the gold-lettered sign, the way light fell through the lace-curtained window onto her cutting table. She'd worked until her fingers bled, saved every coin, answered every letter with caution and grace. This one she had trusted. She'd thought this time might be different. The platform boards creaked. She sat upright. A tall shadow stood in the doorway, hat in hand. It was him, the man from across the corral. He stepped forward, slow, boots scuffing against old pine. "I figured you looked like someone who hadn't been claimed," the deep voice said from behind her. "Not by him, anyhow." She didn't answer at first. He stood just inside the threshold, hands rough, face carved by sun and time. He looked neither cruel nor kindly, just solid, like something that wouldn't blow over. "I'm Gideon Thorne," he said. "Martha Larkspur." He nodded, eyes scanning her belongings. The bench, the flickering oil lamp on the wall. "You got a place to sleep, Miss Larkspur." She lifted her chin. "Here will do." "Station floor's hard," he said. "Colder than it looks. I've known worse." Something flickered in his eyes then. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "I've got a place," he said after a pause. "Out past Mesquite Creek. Was a line shack for the cattle hands, but it's dry, has a stove, and won't talk behind your back." She narrowed her eyes. And what would be expected in return? He didn't flinch. "Nothing you don't care to give." She searched his face for mockery, for manipulation. Found neither. "Why help me?" she asked. He tipped his head slightly, as if puzzled by the question. "You were left behind. That ain't right." Her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. "I'll leave the offer standing," he said. "If you want it." With a tip of his hat, he stepped back into the night. The wind followed him out. The depot was quiet once more. She stared at the door for a long time, listening to the wind rattle the window pane and the ticking of the station clock. She was tired, bone tired, but something inside her stirred. A glimmer of warmth, not hope perhaps, but something like it. A flicker. Outside, the last train whistle blew, long and low, disappearing into the distance she'd already left behind. She pressed her hands together, let out a breath, and whispered to the darkness, "I didn't come this far, to be turned back." And so she stood, picked up her bag, and followed the path into the wind. "I figured you looked like someone who hadn't been claimed," the deep voice said from behind her. "Not by him, anyhow." The cabin stood where the land began to breathe again. Past the dust, past the town, tucked beside a creek that murmured secrets to no one. The ride out from Mercy Hill had been long, but not difficult. Gideon's wagon creaked with age, pulled by a patient mule and flanked by silence. Martha sat beside him. Her carpet bag wedged between her boots, her hands gloved but clenched in her lap. Neither spoke for the first mile. The only sound was the creak of the wheels, the occasional bray of wind through brittle weeds, and the groan of leather harness against wood. She stole a glance at him now and again. He seemed carved from old cedar, solid, grainy, unyielding. His eyes were hard to read beneath the brim of his hat, but they didn't wander. He did not look her over like a man measuring purchase. That alone set him apart from every man she had known in her 60 years. They passed a grove of mesquite trees, branches dancing in the dry breeze like old women in long shawls. Somewhere beyond, the soft sound of water rippled, surprising her. She had expected harshness, barrenness. Instead, the land seemed watchful, not unkind. "You said this place was a line shack," she finally said, breaking the silence. "It was," he replied without turning. "Used to serve the north route of Thornhold Cattle Drive. Hasn't seen use since the herd shifted east. Thornhold, she repeated. That your land? He nodded once. She didn't press him further. When they arrived, she saw the truth of his words. The shack was small, one room with a porch, its roof slightly bowed from years of snow and wind. The door was hanging on tight leather hinges, a single oil lamp visible through the tiny window. But it was clean, cared for. The porch had been swept, and the path to the well worn down by recent feet. He pulled the wagon to a halt, stepped down, and offered her a hand. She didn't take it at first, then did, because she wanted to prove she still could, not because she needed to. Her boots crunched against the hard-packed dirt, and she took in the full sight of the place. It ain't much, Gideon said quietly. But it's dry, the stove works, and the roof don't leak none. She nodded. That's more than most can promise. I'll bring by some supplies tomorrow, he added. And tools. Might need a bit of fixing if you plan to stay more than a night. Do you? He turned then, properly facing her. Up to you, Miss Larkspur. She nodded again, slower this time, and walked toward the door. Inside, the air was stale but clean. A small table, one chair, a narrow cot tucked against the wall with a folded quilt atop it. A hearth with a kettle, a crate of split wood stacked nearby. The dust was thin, not new. Someone had made effort to prepare it. She ran her gloved hand across the table's edge. You cleaned this? Gideon shrugged. Figured someone might need it. Why? He said nothing at first. Then, because someone once did that for me. Their eyes met, brief, unspoken understanding. She looked away first, ashamed of how quickly her throat tightened. Well, she said, I'll see to it proper. I know you will. He stepped back toward the door, but paused. I'll be back at sunup. Don't trouble yourself. It ain't trouble. Then softer. Don't light the fire too late. Smoke travels. She nodded, and he stepped out, the door shutting gently behind him. She stood there for a long while, her bag still at her feet. The place was small, but it was hers, if only for now. It smelled faintly of pine smoke, leather, and something else. Juniper, maybe. She opened the single drawer by the table and found a spoon, carved smooth and dark with age. That night, she lit the fire and unpacked her things. A small bundle of clothing, her sewing kit, well worn, a thimble, a pair of spectacles wrapped in an embroidered handkerchief with the initials ML stitched into the corner. The last was her keepsake box, a lacquered tin from home holding a photograph, 2 buttons, and a strip of lace that once trimmed a wedding veil. She placed them on the table, lit the oil lamp, and turned to the hearth. Outside, the wind rose. At dawn, as promised, Gideon returned. He brought flour, beans, coffee, and a bundle tied in a checkered cloth. She watched him approach from the doorway, hands crossed in front of her apron. He set the supplies inside and unwrapped the cloth. Inside were stockings, a fresh bar of soap, and a dress, plain gray calico, soft to the touch. That from you? She asked. No. Mrs. Henderson picked it, said it was suitable. And you agreed? He looked sheepish. I didn't argue. She allowed the corner of her mouth to twitch. Well, tell her thank you. I will. He lingered at the doorway, not crossing the threshold. I found a spoon, she said after a moment. Nice carving. Yours? He nodded. Made it yourself? He nodded again. Well, it's a good spoon. Silence settled again between them. Not awkward. Not cold. Just settled, like dust that no longer fought the wind. Later that afternoon, she sat on the porch, mending one of the shirts he'd left folded on the crate near the stove. The shirt was thick, dark cotton, stitched rough and worn soft with time. Her fingers worked the needle through the tear near the shoulder, and as she did, she remembered her old shop, the light filtering through the window, casting her scissors in silhouette. Brides who wept, widows who waited, girls who dreamed. She had stitched for all of them. And now, here she was, with no shop, no lace, no name tied to hers. And yet, this shirt, this tear, felt more real than any silk she'd handled in years. Gideon returned just before dusk, bringing with him 2 tin mugs filled with coffee. He handed her one, then sat on the steps. They drank in silence, watching the sky dim. "Why'd you come here?" he asked. She looked ahead. "Because I was tired of waiting for something to change. I thought maybe I'd change instead." "You have family back east?" "No one who'd know I was gone." He didn't press further. She took another sip. "And you?" He ran a hand through his beard. "Lost mine to sickness, a long time ago." She waited, but he said no more. Eventually she rose and stepped inside. He followed to the door, stopping just short again. "Thank you," she said, meaning it more than he might know. He tipped his hat. As she closed the door behind him, she glanced once at the mantel. There, above the hearth, hung an old rifle. It wasn't the sight of it that struck her, but the way it was cleaned, oiled, placed with care. This wasn't a forgotten shack. This was a place tended to, watched over, preserved. She wrapped the mended shirt and placed it beside her sewing kit. That night, the wind whispered through the trees, but the fire kept steady. She slept without fear, and in the morning, as she lit the stove, her fingers lingering on the match just a moment too long, she whispered to the room, to herself, to the wide sky beyond the walls. "They'll talk. They always do." The morning air held a chill that did not match the sun, and the cabin's roof wore a silver skin of frost that caught fire when the light touched it. It had been over a week since Martha Larkspur settled into the shack on Mesquite Creek. What began as a refuge had grown into a rhythm, quiet, steady, and for the first time in a long time, hers. She woke with the sun, brewed coffee on the cast-iron stove, and spent her days mending, scrubbing, writing brief letters she never sent, and walking the line where meadow faded into sage and sky. But Mercy Hill had not gone quiet. Rumors had begun their slow crawl through the narrow alleys of the town's conscience. Mrs. Pike, as steady and sharp as ever, was the first to speak it aloud in the general store. That woman's living in a man's shack, and not the man she came here for, neither. The words traveled like wood smoke, thick, clinging, impossible to ignore. Martha heard the whispers when she made the rare trip into town. She saw them in glances that slid away too quickly, in the deliberate silence when she entered the millinery. Mrs. Henderson had been kind, still offering scraps and notions for her work, but even she carried a softness in her gaze that spoke of quiet worry. Still, Martha returned each time with her spine straight and chin lifted. That morning, Gideon arrived before the frost had melted. He didn't knock. He never did. Just a tap of boots on the step and a polite morning through the open window. She handed him coffee in the tin cup he'd left behind on his first visit, now hers, now familiar. He sipped, standing at the porch rail, staring into the dawn like it held answers worth waiting for. "They're talking," she said. "I know." "They think," she began, then stopped. Her voice tightened. "They think I've done something shameful. You haven't. They won't see it that way." He turned to face her. "Then let them stare." "That's easy for you to say." He said nothing, but his jaw tensed. She took a breath, gentled her voice. "Why haven't you told them?" "Told them what?" "Who you are." His eyes darkened, though not in anger. "They know enough. They think you're a hired hand, a drifter. And? You own this land." Gideon. "Land don't mean respect." She looked at him hard. "It might, if they knew who was offering me shelter." He didn't answer right away. Then, "You afraid they'd think worse of you? Or better of me?" Her throat worked, but she didn't speak. He finished the coffee and set the cup down, gently. Come with me. Where? To see the truth. They walked together, leaving the shack and creek behind, following a narrow path that wound through cottonwoods and dry grass, bending to the shape of the land. The sun had climbed higher now, warming the trail, making the frost beneath the trees shimmer like broken glass. They came upon a wide clearing, then a rise beyond it. And at its peak, a house. Not just a house, a home. Large, solid, wrapped in a wide porch with a stone chimney and windows trimmed in green. Thornhold, he said. She turned to him, brows raised. My family built it. Before the war. My father held the deed, and when he passed, it came to me. I left it for a time. Couldn't bear it. But it's mine still. Why did you leave it? He stared out at the porch, his voice low. My brother died in Virginia. I came back with nothing but his boots and a torn sleeve. Couldn't stand the house without his voice in it. And now, he said quietly, I want it to live again. He took her inside. The house was dusty but not decayed. Covered furniture stood like ghosts in the corners. The kitchen smelled of old spices and dry herbs. A rifle hung above the hearth. In the parlor sat a rocking chair and a broken violin. Upstairs, in a narrow room with a single window facing the hills, sat a trunk. Gideon opened it with reverence. Inside lay a dress, yellowed but fine, a photograph, a Bible, a letter. She was going to marry me, he said. Her name was Alice. Martha stepped back. Sickness took her. Before the wedding, I kept everything. Couldn't bear to stay. Rode out for years, found cattle, dust, and silence. Then, I returned, found you at the station. I didn't come here to replace anyone, Martha said. I never asked you to. They stood in silence for a long time. Then she said, Why show me this now? Because they'll come for you soon. The law, the church, the whispers. And I want you to know, if you choose to stay, you're not just staying in a shack. You're standing on ground that bears my name. She exhaled. You're offering protection. I'm offering truth. And choice. When they returned to the shack, the air had shifted. A dust cloud approached from the town. Horses, 2 wagons. One carried Mrs. Pike, Judge Morrison, and a young man in a stiff coat. Someone official. Someone sent to make things orderly. Martha stood on the porch, apron dusted with flour, hands steady. Gideon stepped beside her. The judge removed his hat as he dismounted. Miss Larkspur, he greeted. Judge. There's talk, he said. There usually is. Talk that you've taken up residence on a man's land, without benefit of clergy, without title or name. I have, she said, but not without dignity. The young man beside the judge cleared his throat. There are ordinances. Propriety must be maintained. Mercy Hill cannot afford scandal. Is Mercy Hill in danger, sir? She asked. He shifted uncomfortably. Judge Morrison looked past her, at the shack, the land beyond, the rising roofline of Thornhold on the distant hill. He then looked at Gideon. You own this land? I do. And the woman? Gideon's voice was firm. She's free, but under my protection. A pause. Then the judge said, It won't sit well. It'll settle, Gideon replied. Another beat of silence. Then the judge tipped his hat. Make it right soon, or make it quiet. With that, they turned and rode off, leaving the dust to settle in their wake. Martha turned to Gideon. He expects a wedding. I expect nothing, Gideon said softly. She looked out toward the hills. And if I don't, you'll still have the shack, and the land. I already put the deed in your name. She froze. You... what? I had it drawn up last week. Signed. Witnessed. It's yours, whether you stay or not. Why? Because the day you sat alone on that platform and didn't cry, I knew you were stronger than anyone I'd ever met. This land deserves someone who won't run." The wind picked up, rustling the cottonwoods. She said nothing. Not yet. She didn't say yes. Not yet. But she didn't run, and the next morning, she brought him coffee in the cup he'd thought lost for good. The wind changed with the first storm of spring, blowing in not with fury, but with a slow, thoughtful breath that rustled the cottonwoods and stirred the scent of damp earth through the shack at Mesquite Creek. Martha stood on the porch with her sewing basket in her hands, watching the sky darken toward slate. The season had shifted subtly, but with purpose. The snow no longer clung to the ridges, and the air held a softness behind its chill. Storms here didn't announce themselves loudly. They came slow, watching, waiting for the moment to fall. Inside, the stove ticked softly, and a pan of beans simmered low. Her needle paused between stitches. She was mending again. Another of Gideon's old shirts. He never asked her to. Never offered more than a quiet thank you and a slight nod when he noticed the tear was gone. But she kept doing it. The needle calmed her. It gave her fingers something to do while her mind worked through the rest. Since the visit from Judge Morrison and the town men, Mercy Hill had grown sharper. Church bells rang louder. Eyes lingered longer. She didn't return to town anymore. Gideon brought supplies now, quietly, efficiently, without comment. He stayed longer each time, sometimes helping her sweep the porch or oil the hinges. Other times, he simply sat nearby, saying nothing while she worked. She had come to expect him, even if she never admitted it. That morning, he arrived with a small wooden box under one arm. "Found this in the cellar," he said. She opened it slowly. Inside, buttons, silver cufflinks, a Bible, and a folded paper. The cufflinks were worn with initials long faded. The Bible's leather cover was dry and cracking, the spine delicate. But it was the folded paper that caught her breath. A deed, dated 1887, her name in ink. "Is this legal?" she asked. He nodded once. "And binding?" "Signed by 2 witnesses, and the judge himself." Her hands trembled slightly as she folded it back. "You gave me your land." "I gave you a piece of it," he corrected. "Enough for the shack. Enough to be yours if anyone questions it again." "But why?" He looked away. "Because no one else ever gave you anything, far as I can see." Silence stretched long between them. "You could have offered marriage outright," she said after a while. "It would have silenced them." "I'm not looking to silence them," he said. "I'm looking to be heard. By you." She looked down at her hands, thumbed the corner of the paper. "Why haven't you asked?" she whispered. He met her eyes then. "Because I want you to want it." It wasn't an offer born of pity or pressure. It wasn't dressed up in flowery words or softened by desperation. It was as solid as the boards beneath their feet, and as quiet as the wind through the canyon. She turned away, toward the storm, letting the silence swallow the moment whole. That night, the rain came. She lay awake, listening to it patter gently against the roof. No leaks. The patchwork they'd done 2 days prior held strong. Thunder rumbled low, far off, like the groaning of old earth remembering something long buried. She rose and lit the oil lamp. The shack glowed warm, soft. She moved to the mantel and stared at the rifle still resting above it. Below it, she placed the deed in a small tin box and slid it into the shelf Gideon had repaired. She sat at the table and opened her sewing kit. But her fingers didn't move. Instead, she found her pen, opened her journal, and wrote 3 words she hadn't dared write since leaving England. "I am here." The next morning, Gideon came again. This time, earlier than usual, his hat soaked from the drizzle. He removed it as he stepped onto the porch. "You didn't light your lamp last night." "I did." He hesitated. Then I must have missed it. They shared breakfast. Cornbread, strong coffee, dried apples. No talk of land. No talk of townsfolk. Just small things. How the creek had swelled. How the mule needed shoeing. How the wildflowers would come soon. After the dishes were cleared and the rain began again, he stood by the doorway and looked at her long. "I built something," he said, "up at the ridge." "What sort of something?" "Come see." She followed him along the trail, through the trees slick with rain, up the ridge that overlooked both the shack and Thornhold in the distance. There, beneath the bent juniper and beside an outcrop of red stone, stood an arch. Simple. Clean. Built of 2 rough timbers lashed with iron nails. Flowers would one day grow beneath it. The creek's song rose faint from the valley. She stepped beneath it slowly. "This is a wedding arch," she said. "It is." Her hands found the smooth grain of the post. "You built this for me." "I built it for us." She didn't turn around. "You still haven't asked," she said. He moved beside her, hands at his sides, eyes on the land. "I figured," he said quietly, "if you stood under it and didn't walk away, that'd be answer enough." The rain picked up, gentle and cool. She closed her eyes and listened, to the wind, to the water, to her own breath. Then she spoke, soft and sure. "I haven't walked away." Later that day, while packing dried beans and cleaning the hearth, she found a small bundle wrapped in an oilcloth near the edge of the porch. Inside, a silver thimble, polished clean. She knew it was not hers. She turned the thimble in her hand and saw an engraving inside. To E. And in that moment, a question she hadn't dared form took root. As real as the soil beneath her feet. Who was E? And why did Gideon keep the past so quietly sealed? She rose slowly, staring at the trees swaying outside the shack, the rain washing the dust from their bark, leaving them raw and dark. The silver thimble sat cold in her palm, and just before the wind closed the door behind her, she whispered to the empty room, "He hasn't told me everything." There are silences in a man's life that don't mean peace. They mean something was buried so deep. Even the wind forgot to look for it. Martha stood by the creek's bend, where the trees leaned low and the water ran fast. She held the thimble still in her hand, now wrapped in a bit of cloth from her old skirt, kept close, like something fragile or holy. She hadn't asked about it yet, not because she feared the answer, but because she wasn't sure Gideon would give one. He had spoken often in gestures, firewood left by the door, boots cleaned and set upright after rain, dried mint hanging from the eaves, but names, stories, the truths behind old items, he kept those tight. 3 days had passed since she'd found the thimble. In that time, she'd replayed its discovery a dozen ways in her mind. Sometimes it was his mother's, other times a sister's, but she knew better. The curve of the silver was delicate, the engraving inside too precise to be casual. To E. Not A, not Alice, the woman he had spoken of before. This was someone else. Someone kept quiet. That morning, Martha packed a small satchel and told Gideon she needed to go into town alone. He looked up from the fence post he was repairing and nodded, but the muscle in his jaw twitched once before he replied, "Take the gray mule. She won't spook if it rains." "Thank you." She rode slow, eyes on the trail, breath steady. Mercy Hill was busier than she remembered. Rain had brought trade wagons to the smithy, and the scent of tobacco mixed with the brine of drying hides near the tanners. She passed Mrs. Pike on the steps of the dry goods store, her gaze sharp as ever, but Martha did not flinch. She tipped her hat and kept walking. The church stood quiet, doors ajar. But it was the library she sought, a small room above the tailor's shop, run by Miss Calloway, the pastor's niece. Inside, dust floated like lace in the morning sun. Shelves groaned with old hymnals, farm ledgers, shipping manifests, and one shelf, slender, creaking, held a box of photographs. Names penciled on the back, if you were lucky. "Looking for someone?" Miss Calloway asked, adjusting her spectacles. "I don't know," Martha replied. She searched for an hour, careful, slow, and then she found it. A photograph, yellowed at the edges. A woman sitting stiff-backed in front of a clapboard house, wearing a simple checked dress. Her hair was pinned in a tight knot. But it wasn't her posture or her dress that caught Martha's breath. It was the thimble, silver, shining on the woman's right hand, clearly visible as she rested it atop her sewing box. She turned it over. Written faint in pencil, Eliza Boone, Thornhold Ridge, 1871. Boone, not Thorn. Martha stood in the quiet library, staring down at a stranger's face, feeling the walls of the life she'd built shift ever so slightly beneath her feet. She rode home as thunderclouds gathered again, the gray mule steady beneath her. She tucked the photograph inside her coat, next to her skin. That night she said little. She stirred the stew, mended another hem, and sat beside Gideon on the porch as the sun sank red behind the hills. He smoked his pipe, thoughtful, slow. "I saw a name today," she said. His hand paused near the stem. "Eliza Boone." He didn't move. She wore a silver thimble, looked just like mine. He exhaled once, a deep, slow breath that didn't carry smoke. "I thought you said Alice was the only one." "She was," he said quietly. "To me. But not the first." His eyes remained on the horizon. "No." She waited. "Eliza was my brother's wife." Martha blinked. "Your brother's?" "She came to Thornhold in the summer of 1870. Married Jonah that fall. Sweet woman. Quiet. Had a spine stronger than most of the men who tried to tame this land." "What happened?" His jaw worked, and his voice thickened. "Jonah enlisted when the territory stirred. Left her behind. I stayed to look after things. She took sick the following winter. Fever. I brought the doctor from 2 towns over. Didn't matter. She died in that house, holding a photograph of him." He paused. "I buried her myself. By the creek. Under the old ash." Martha's heart ached. Not from betrayal, but from recognition. Loss layered upon loss. She could see it now, the way he stood near the mantel too long, the silence when she asked about the past, the thimble he kept hidden, but couldn't let go. "She loved to sew," he added, voice barely above the wind. Said it made her feel like she was building something, even when the world was tearing apart. Martha nodded slowly. "She was never mine," he said, "but I loved her just the same." The silence between them was full, not heavy, not cruel, just full, of memory, of regret, of the pieces people carry without showing. Martha reached into her apron and handed him the thimble. He took it like it was glass. "I kept it," he said. "But I couldn't look at it long." "Do you still love her?" "I always will," he answered. She nodded once, then, "But you don't live with ghosts." "No," he said. "I live with the living." Later that evening, as she cleaned the table and listened to the rain settle onto the roof, she felt lighter, though nothing had changed. The past had come to sit at their fire, and it hadn't stolen the warmth. It had made more room for it. She stepped outside, let the rain touch her face. In the distance, a rider approached. Not Gideon, not a townsman, a boy, no more than 15, breathless, wild-eyed. "You the woman what lives here?" he gasped. "I am." He handed her a folded note, sealed with the stamp of Montgomery Parish. She opened it slowly, read the words once, then again. Her eyes lifted to the boy. "Where did you get this?" "Sheriff," he panted. "He said to bring it fast." She stepped back, stunned, because the letter bore a name she hadn't heard in years, not Larkspur. Not Martha, but the name she'd left behind in England, before the shop, before the ship, before the lie that started everything. She whispered it out loud, and the boy heard. "You ain't who they think you are you?" he asked. And Martha, still holding the letter with shaking hands, could not find the breath to answer. The letter smelled of old paper and saddle oil, and the ink had run slightly at the edge from the boy's damp hands. But the name scrawled across the front remained legible as thunder. Mabel Hartwick, care of Mercy Hill Station, urgent. Martha, no, Mabel, stood in the doorway of the shack with the boy still watching her, and the truth she had buried thousands of miles away rose up in her throat like smoke from a long-dead fire. She told the boy nothing. Just thanked him, too gently, and watched as he kicked his heels into the mule and vanished back into the darkening trail. Then she lit the lamp, sat at the edge of her cot, and unfolded the past. The letter was brief, official in tone, but human between the lines. To Miss Hartwick, formerly of Devonshire, a matter involving the estate of the late Harold Kingsley has come under inquiry. A sum of money, previously forfeited under suspicion of fraud, has been released. You are named beneficiary. The matter requires your physical presence for final confirmation. Signed, J.M., Bridger Clerk of Montgomery Parish Court. Mabel read it again, and again. The words blurred. Harold, her late husband, the man who ruined her name, who forged her signature, sold off her father's tailor business, vanished with a borrowed fortune, and left her with scandal and shame, thick as smoke, choking her shop walls. They hadn't believed her. The London courts, her own neighbors. Even her clients, those wealthy women who once praised her stitchwork, had crossed the street to avoid her shadow. It was why she boarded that ship, why she changed her name, why she buried Mabel Hartwick beneath the name Martha Larkspur, like a body in unmarked soil. Now that name had clawed its way up again, not to condemn, but to claim. By lamplight, she turned the envelope over, fingers trembling. The following morning, Gideon arrived as always, steady, silent. She didn't greet him with coffee. Instead, she placed the letter in his hand. He read it slowly, twice. His jaw didn't move, but his brow tightened. When he looked up, she said nothing. She waited. He handed the letter back. "You need to go. I thought I'd buried her. Some things won't stay buried. And if I go, you come back," he said plainly. "You don't know that." "I do." She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the hem of her bodice. Then, almost absently, she reached for the oilcloth and unwrapped the thimble, the one with E carved inside, and placed it on the mantel next to the tin box holding her deed. "I don't know what's waiting for me," she said. "Money, or scandal, or the ghosts I thought I left behind." "I know," he said. She met his eyes. "And if I don't come back," he paused, "then I'll know it wasn't by choice." She wanted to say something soft, something like, "Thank you," or "Wait for me," or "I never meant to love anyone again, but somehow you." But she didn't. Instead, she did what she'd always done. She packed. She took only what she needed: a change of clothes, her sewing kit, her journal, the photograph of Eliza Boone she left behind, on purpose. The shack had become more than walls. It had become a confession, and confessions had to be left unguarded to be believed. Gideon hitched the wagon himself and loaded it with hay to mask the fact she was leaving with anything more than errands. "I'll take you as far as the stage road," he said. They rode in silence, but not the kind that wounded, the kind that held things still enough to keep them from breaking. When they reached the fork near the hollowed pine tree, he pulled the mule to a stop. "From here you walk." She stepped down, adjusted her shawl, and faced him. "You sure you'll be all right?" she asked. "Always have been. You don't have to wait." "I'm not waiting," he said. "I'm living." She hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed her lips, dry and warm, against his temple. "Don't let them take this land from you," she whispered. "They'll have to go through both of us." She walked into the tree line and never looked back, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't trust herself to keep walking if she did. The journey east took 6 days. She slept in barns, ate biscuits cold from her coat pocket, and stitched a boy's torn knapsack on the 3rd night in exchange for hot stew. On the 6th day, she stepped into the Montgomery Parish courthouse, straight-backed and trembling. Clerk Bridger was thin, balding, with spectacles too wide for his nose. "You're late," he said. "I wasn't invited," she replied. He didn't smile, but he did nod. "You're not the only one with scars, Miss Hartwick." The proceedings were brief. Harold Kingsley's estate had been unsealed following the confession of an associate. The evidence proved her innocence. She was owed back funds, plus interest, enough to buy Mercy Hill 3 times over. But when asked where to send the money, she gave a quiet reply. "Nowhere. I'll collect it when I'm ready." Bridger blinked. "Ma'am, this is a considerable sum." She nodded. "And I'm not in a hurry." That night, she sat in a small rented room above the post office. She wrote a single letter on borrowed stationery. The words were few. "Gideon, I haven't vanished. I am coming home. There's something of mine I left hanging beside the stove. Don't let the wind steal it. Mabel." She folded it once, then scratched out her name and rewrote it. Martha. And when the stage rolled west at dawn, she was on it. 2 days later, the wind howled through Mesquite Creek harder than it had all season. Gideon stood on the porch of the shack, oil lamp in hand, eyes squinting toward the road. There was no rider, no wagon, no letter. He stepped inside and lit the stove. On the mantel, the thimble had fallen to its side. The tin box had been moved slightly. And beside the hearth, right where she always placed her boots, was a scrap of parchment he didn't remember dropping. He bent and unfolded it. It read, "They said I'd never be more than a woman who ran." Beneath it, in faint ink, a second line, "But I've stopped running." He didn't hear the knock. Not at first, not until it came again, firmer. When he opened the door, the sun was just rising behind her, and the dust on her skirt caught fire in its light. She didn't speak. Neither did he. She just stepped forward, reached up, and pressed the old silver thimble into his hand. He closed his fingers around it, slow. And when she spoke, her voice was the same, but her name wasn't. "I'm Martha now," she said. "And I've earned it." And before he could answer, the wind picked up again, and the oil lamp flickered behind them, but didn't go out. Out there, where the prairie bends into silence, and the last glimmers of twilight curl like smoke above the ridgeline, there's a place where time slows down, just enough for the truth to catch up, even if it arrives late and dusty. The wind still carries whispers from that shack by Mesquite Creek, and if you listen close, you might still hear the soft clink of a silver thimble being set on a wooden mantel, or the rustle of a shawl as a woman steps through a door not to flee, but to return. Sometimes, the stories that matter most aren't the loud ones, they're the quiet ones, stitched together like a patchwork quilt of memory, regret, forgiveness, and something sturdier than hope. You might remember the sound of a needle through cotton, the creak of an old wagon wheel groaning up a narrow pass, or the scent of wild mint drying in bundles near a stove that never stopped warming that room. You might not remember her name, and maybe that's all right, because she had more than one, and each of them was earned. A name worn like a coat through storm after storm until the weather cleared and she could hang it by the fire with her hands finally still. And the man, well, he wasn't the kind to shout or plead. His truth came in small acts, like repaired hinges and land quietly given. And the building of a wedding arch that could have stood there 100 years, even if no one ever walked beneath it. But someone did, and though the town might still gossip, and the past might still flicker in the corners of memory like the tail end of a prairie fire, what matters is that she stood her ground when it counted, not with noise, but with the stillness of someone who had run far enough. Some stories don't end with justice shouted from a mountaintop, but whispered through letters, cradled in old tin boxes, and written in the curve of a woman's spine as she steps down from a stagecoach with her name reclaimed. Justice, when it comes late, doesn't make noise. It just feels like a deep breath after years of holding it in. A forgotten woman once made invisible by scandal, by shame, by the small-minded talk of a town that never knew her, turned out to be the kind of soul who could plant decency in a land that had long gone dry. You don't need a crowd to see the truth. You just need one person who refuses to look away. And if you ever pass by a place like Mercy Hill, look for the old shack with the slanted porch and the wind chimes made from spoon handles. Maybe you'll find a quilt drying on the line, or the smell of warm cornbread floating through the air, or the sharp edge of an old name carved on the underside of the hearth. You may even catch a glimpse of a man and woman sitting in companionable silence, their pasts stacked between them like firewood. Not burning, just ready for when the night grows cold. Out here, the land remembers who walked it with sorrow and who walked it with grace. It remembers every step of a woman who no longer had to prove anything to anyone but herself. And when the wind blows just right, carrying the sound of hooves far off on the ridge and the faint ringing of church bells dulled by time, you'll understand the lesson. Honor can be buried, but it is never erased. Justice may not wear a badge or a robe. It might come in the form of a woman who dared to stitch herself back together. And if your heart stirred while hearing her journey, if something in you leaned toward the warmth of that fire, then leave a sign, somewhere, somehow, that you still believe in decency, in redemption, in the slow return of truth. We tell these stories not because the world has forgotten, but because we have not. And if you're still here, still listening, then perhaps you were meant to carry her story too. Let your spirit rest in that. And if you wish to hear more tales carved from silence, soil, and second chances, subscribe to our channel and let the next story find you when the wind is ready.